Thank you, Martin. We are super excited to be here. I am Jerker Lessing. I'm an adjunct professor here at Stanford.
Yeah, and I'm Daniel Hall. I'm assistant professor at TU Delft in the Netherlands, and also previously did my PhD here at Stanford, where we got started.
Exactly. We are, of course, both excited, also, I think, a little proud that we have been doing this for 10 years. It's been a very interesting 10 years, and we thought it would be a good idea to reflect a little backwards, but also a little forward. So we wanted to take the opportunity to do that today.
Yeah, and so the way we decided to organize our talk, and we wanted to make it a shared talk, which is not easy, but we think we have a format that worked, is we're using the format of 10 for 10. So maybe some of you know the American sports broadcasting company ESPN. They did a 30 for 30, where they came up with 30 short documentaries to celebrate their 30-year anniversary. We wanted to come up with 10 points about industrialized construction to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of this forum, which was started as a way to really create a knowledge exchange and an interest and sharing for industrialized construction. And then we split that into two different sections. So first, we wanted to look back. We think it's important to recognize what's happened in the last 10 years as a foundation for where we are today. So the first 5 points that we have are related to the past and what we've discovered in the 10 years of doing this event. And then looking forward, we want to give 5 points for where we think we're going, where we think the challenges are, where we think the research and the industry innovation opportunities are in the next 10 years or 20 and beyond. So that's the format we're going for, and with that, I give it to Jerker, who will start with our first one.
Okay, thanks. So we actually took off this journey based on the Swedish roots. And that's because I think I'm from Sweden. And it all started in 2013. When I was here, I was invited to come here as a guest researcher. And I spent 4 months here at Stanford. And I brought my research and my industry experience from Sweden about industrialized construction. And I got the chance to give a course about this topic where I could collect my thoughts and my research material and the framework around industrialized construction and bring to the students and researchers around here. And that course became the spark and the start of the journey of IC around here. I forgot to say when I introduced myself, I am adjunct professor here since a number of years, but I have my main time I spend in Sweden. I'm an industry consultant. I have worked with industrialized construction for 20 years, both in academia. I did my PhD at Lund University, but also in industry in various roles. The last 8 years with BoKlok, an IC company that many of you have heard of in Sweden, but also in other countries. So, but that was the start. I came over a little shaky in my knees to present my research from Sweden to this crowd, but it was very well received. So what was it then that I brought over? Well, actually a pretty long history of industrialized construction. In Sweden, we have been sort of applying these principles for a long time, for at least 100 years in the single-family homes industry. That has reached a level of actually 90% market share of industrialized construction used to produce and offer these products. So that was one part. We also had in the 1960s the large Million Homes program. And as the title says, 1 million homes to be built in 10 years. That was with a population of 7 million people, so it was a really, really massive initiative. Gave a lot of experience, a lot of development was done, of course, but also some very, very important learnings about mass production in that scale can come with some challenges. So that was also important knowledge and to think of and reflect of, and I think we can keep that in mind also for discussions today. But what was maybe more contemporary was the early 2000s, where we had a couple of very important so-called triple helix programs, where industry, academia, and government collaborated to really push the knowledge further about industrialized construction. So that laid the foundation of contemporary and, so to say, modern thinking around industrialized construction. I was part of at least 2 of these programs. And that gave also many initiatives, both academic, of course, but not least many different development initiatives, and that was really anchored in industry, and that sparked really strong development in our industry, and we can see the effect of that now. But then, the year after, we organized the first Industrialized Construction Forum in December 2014. Daniel and 2 other students were organizing, and I was invited as the keynote speaker to talk about what happened, the knowledge from Sweden. So the circle is now closed, I think, in a way. We had some other pioneers from around here, from California. We had Bone Structure, Project Frog, Clark Pacific, Connextech, pioneers that shared their inspiration and also development and what they saw. So some of you, I think, are actually here still today. So thanks a lot for the support over the years. It's been very interesting, very rewarding, very exciting and important, I think, both for the forum, but for the class and for research and so on. So thanks a lot for that. And we continued developing and organizing the IC Forum, and here we are 10 years later.
Yes, but it's not just a Swedish roots story, because what I think is really unique about this community was the combination of that history that Jyrker brought from Sweden, but also the mixing with this ecosystem here in Silicon Valley of California digital innovation. And as somebody from California and doing my master's and eventually my PhD, I remember I was very intrigued by this idea, these ideas that Jyrker was talking about in his class, the building as a product and product platforms, and the way that there needs to be this continuity and continuous improvement in our building systems. I found it really interesting, but I also was experiencing a lot of really great courses at Stanford about digital innovation and technology, and we hadn't quite seen that yet at a great degree with the companies that Jyrker was presenting. And so then being exposed to this kind of, these early ideas coming together was for me a really aha moment. And I like to tell this story because this was my really aha moment when I first was exposed to the idea of a digital configurator. And I used the example from Project Frog, one of our early presenters and collaborators. When they started talking about having a kit of parts and thinking about a kit of parts, and this was in 2015, but then also taking that kit of parts and building a digital configurator to allow them to kind of coordinate where the parts and pieces would go, to create a kind of design restraint system so that you have a connection between your design space and your production system. And in the meantime, doing this all without themselves owning a factory, but coordinating a supply chain to do that. And for me, that was really a kind of really radical moment to understand that this might unlock some of the ideas that we've been talking about, and also allow it to kind of have an automation process. So from there you can immediately generate your bill of materials, your shop drawings, all your calculations. And they were able to do this in a matter of minutes and hours in a process for a normal project built from scratch that might take weeks. So that was back in 2015, and for me, I thought that this was the link between the idea of a product platform and mass customization. And I won't say too much in detail about this, other than that, what happens is that when you have a product structure with a kit of parts, you can then encode your configuration rules in a certain way. And that really becomes a customer acquisition tool. It allows a designer or a customer to then have their inputs, their preferences, that don't break the constraints of your system. And in the end, you can achieve this idea of a customized product, or this idea of mass customization, which to me seems to have been one of the kind of important goals of the last 10 years, is to think about how do we achieve some degree of flexibility that customers want, while also getting the benefits of an industrialized production system. And we continued that research when I continued on, and we kind of identified that there was actually 3 levels of configurators that people were working on. And many of them are past speakers that we've had in the last 10 years. But we have kind of the typology 1, which we call the planning configurator, which really helps you at the real estate development level understand kind of the setup of the site, the setup of the modules, to figure out kind of where things might sit. We also have the example of what I'd call a design configurator, where now you're really kind of getting into the design. You want to make sure you have a fabrication-aware design. And here are a couple of speakers that we've had. I categorize this myself, so I hope the companies would agree. But then that helps you to really understand the specifics of the design. And then we've also seen type 3, which is this idea of a production configurator. So there, you're really getting into the actual kind of ERP system for construction, of connecting between the actual layout of your wall panels with your scheduling and bill of materials and et cetera, so managing that. And so we've seen a number of companies that have attacked or tried to understand this idea of digital configurators in different approaches. And this was our kind of research to help us understand how do we think about these different levels of configuration. But anyways, all of that kind of gave me a perspective of the California digital innovation combining with the industrialized construction approach. And that leads to our third point.
Third point is this, that industrialized construction is not the same thing as prefabrication. It's an important part, but these two are not synonyms. And that has been a recurring topic, I think, in talks like this, because it requires some explanations, and going through that has been important, because otherwise I think we would be stuck in more historical ways of seeing what this is about. So I will talk a little about that. It's not a lecture about it. Some of you were into the intro class yesterday, where we talked a little more about it. But the summary here is that industrialized construction is not only prefab. It's not only the choice of a production method, even. And if we look a little into history, prefabrication was actually introduced many, many years ago, at least at scale during the 1950s and 1960s. But if we look at the curves that I won't show you, all of you, I think, know the productivity curves, where construction has remained pretty flat. It did that even though we introduced prefabrication. So obviously that did not solve all our challenges in construction. So what has been an important aspect of industrialization versus prefabrication for us here is that several integrated aspects need to be included in this. We have to shift our focus from, not completely, but at least leverage the focus from the projects that we are good at, of course, in construction. But we need to apply also a product approach and a process approach to really work with recurring processes. This model up here tries to explain that we need to have continuous development processes for our technical solutions, for our processes, methods, and so on, and that to be used as predefined, pre-developed solutions that we use to execute the projects in the best possible way. And not least, use the knowledge that we gained in the projects, use that as input to further development of this platform. Technical platform, process platform, we can combine it into it can be two, but it can also be joined into one product platform. And that requires a strategic orientation, tailored business models. Otherwise, if we are, so to say, stuck in the projects, that will be very difficult to gain all the benefits out of an industrialized process. And if it's done right, this can be disruptive for our industry. Just to emphasize a little more on this, that prefabrication is not alone the solution for our industry. I actually recently found these figures that in Sweden, the use of prefabricated elements for the structural frame for residential building is very, very high. It's actually increased from 1995, when it was 62%, to now it's 88%. So 88% of all residential projects use prefabricated structural frames, super high. But we actually we still struggle in the, so to say, traditional part of the industry with productivity issues and all the other aspects of our industry. On the other hand, a pretty recent study of industrialized construction companies showed that we had an increase of productivity, increase of 20% during the years 2014 and 20. We had an average of 3.3 months shorter lead times, and we had a cost decrease of 16%, while the more traditional part of the industry had an increase of 20%. So when it's done in this more integrated way, we see the effects coming. Just to give you also this glimpse, okay, so what do we then mean with the integrated approach? Well, this is what I mean is in industrialized construction ingredients. All these aspects are needed to create a concept of industrialized construction, but in different ways, of course. And you have seen them all in many, many ways, many different initiatives. The most important thing is integration, that all these sub-areas are required, but they also need to be integrated with each other to create a really strong concept, both in the design aspects and the production aspects, and not least to have a really, really strong understanding and insight about who the customers are and what they want, and so on and so on. So super important to remember this, that prefabrication, production methods, of course, very important, but not the only thing. And this was also early on collected into this model that many of you have been acquainted to. So saying basically the same things. So that was a very important part of the foundation for what industrialized construction is, and that's what we try to embrace here.
And furthermore, what we saw also is that while this model gives a high-level view of what industrialized construction might be comprised of, how you specifically apply that was done by different companies in different ways. And for us, that was a very interesting insight to understand that what we'd call kind of strategies or business models were emerging that would traditionally be kind of the general contractor scope of work, but we saw that companies were taking very different approaches to understanding industrialized construction and changing their business model. And here I just have an example of 3 of the business models shifts that we've identified. We don't say these are the only new business models that exist, but there are 3 that seem to have come up over and over again. And I also list a number of past companies that have spoken at the forum and shown kind of how their specific business models might align there. The first one is the idea that a general contractor would say, okay, we want to invest in a kind of spin-off factory, or we would like to invest in a way that we go away from just managing contracts. We want to actually invest ourselves in the factory and building products. And so we've seen a couple of general contractors who typically have a lot of digital innovation also making the next step and moving towards development of their own prefabrication factory. We've also seen the example of vertical integration. So we see companies saying, we're going to go for full stack integration. We want to combine land development, we want to combine design and connect it to fabrication and assembly on the site. And we've seen a number of companies with that approach, including Bokluk in Sweden. And then finally, we have the example of the digital systems integration, which I mentioned earlier. So this is the idea of a capital light, asset light approach. So you really work on organizing and orchestrating the supply chain with a digital system without actually having to own the factory itself. And we saw recently a number of companies that have really gone towards this approach. In our first session today, you're going to hear also from a set of companies that are thinking about how to meet the needs of their customer. And maybe you can think about also which business model are these companies applying? Is it one of these 3? We also don't say that there is a right business model. People kind of ask, what's the right way to do industrialized construction? And there we often argue it's really about looking back at the customer and the customer needs and the connection with also the production system that you want. And I think it's interesting, there's also on this list, we have companies, and among that list, there's three companies, one in each category, that hasn't made it, right? So that hasn't been successful. And even a couple years ago, we heard about the challenges of industrialized construction, and we can learn from some of the attempts that did not work. But just to kind of understand how we see the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches, for the first one, the nice advantage is that you don't really change your core business. So if you're managing projects and you invest in kind of a spin-off factory, you're not really doing a full shift. You still kind of keep your normal business, but you allow yourself also to have kind of a structured learning process where you're able to learn from the prefabrication approach. The challenge is that you have very slow implementation. You have to really re-educate your supply chain over and over again by project and project, and that can be very frustrating. For vertical integration, the clear advantage there is speed. You're able to kind of do a full stack implementation, very quickly align all the different parts because you have full control. But the negative side is that it's a very capital-intensive approach. Someone told me the factory is a hungry beast, and it's burning capital very quickly. So when you have this approach, you have to be very careful about the cyclical nature of our industry. And finally, the advantage of the digital systems integration is you're very capital light. You can be more agile. You can switch between different product platforms if necessary and different configurations of the supply chain. But the disadvantage is that you still rely on suppliers and you need to co-create your solutions with those suppliers. And the role of integration and interface management becomes really important for the digital systems integration because of that intersection of the different companies coming together. So again, these are 3 business models we've identified, and we think that it's very interesting to see how people are evolving their business strategy in order to kind of take advantage of the opportunities that industrialized construction offers.
And then, looking back again a little on history, or very recent history, we experienced the boom, as we want to call it, a couple of years ago. 2018 to 20, something like that, we experienced that the interest in industrialized construction really exploded is maybe a negative word, but it grew a lot, at least. That's also when we took the forum from half-day event to come to this room and fill up with 170 people. And I think that it, to some extent, also reflects the interest and the big interest in this. The insight, I think, the common insight was that it grew a lot, that construction needs to change, and industrialization in some way, in some sort of execution, is at least an important part of the solution. And we saw during these years many different reports, in a way, stating the same things. Productivity is not good. We see other industries doing much better. We can learn from them, and so on and so on. Not least, I mean, money and cost levels and price levels and all that, super important, but not least also to tackle climate crisis. Was mentioned here, and industrialization was seen as one way of tackling that. We will come back to that pretty soon. We saw also that a lot of the investments in companies like this went to the sky. Some initiatives, for example, Katerra, maybe the most recognized because of the massive funding they received. They did some super interesting and ambitious things. It didn't work out. And we had some others, as Daniel also mentioned, that didn't make it. But we had also many, many others that were a little more silent and worked on, developed, and made really well. But it's always interesting and also important to reflect on both the successes, of course, not least the, so to say, failures, because then we can learn and we don't have to do the same mistakes over and over again. So that was sort of a takeoff for industrialized construction to new levels in that sense.
Good. So just to summarize where we've seen the last 10 years, we had Swedish roots that met California digital innovation. We've really stressed the difference between thinking just about prefabrication versus the holistic view of industrialized construction. We've seen new business models emerge, and we've seen a huge increase in interest in the topic. But what about the future? Where do we see the next 10 years going? And here we just want to give some short insights into where we see things going. And I'll start by saying the robots are coming. I think those who have been around this space know there's been a lot of advancements and also decrease in cost of robotics, both applied in the factory and also on-site or near-site robotics. And we see many different applications. These are just a few, and highlighting a few people that have spoken in the past as well, where we see different ideas around robotic fabrication lines. We look at project layout and controls, of course wearables, 3D printing, and single-task on-site robotics as well. And I think it would be very interesting to think about how do these ideas of robotics integrate with the holistic view of industrialized construction. I think they have an important way that they can come together, but also some important questions that need to be answered. We also have a lot of technical questions, and here I refer back to one of the projects that I was connected with when I was a professor at ETH Zurich called the DFAB House, and this is one technology about spatial timber assemblies, so 3D assembled timber assemblies with robotic fabrication. And there are a number of questions that are around the kind of computer vision and sensing environment. There are questions around how do we have fabrication-informed models and connect the file to the factory. We also have questions around tolerances and how to robotically integrate fabrication and assembly on site. In addition, there's kind of broader industry transformation questions, and the question we always get, will the robots take our jobs? This was a study we did a couple years ago where on the y-axis you have the perceived risk of job loss, and on the x-axis the perceived ease of use of construction robotics. And so we were able to map and think about the different ways that workers and managers also perceive the kind of coming robotic trends. We also have a lot of, I think, unknowns and connection between industry and academia. For my favorite example, it connects to a study we did where we have a lot of industry who'd say, I would like to use 3D printing, right? So it's super in vogue. It's all about kind of the future of technology. But very quickly, you kind of ask, well, what do you mean by 3D printing? Because that's a huge question. Are you talking about direct material extrusion? Are you talking about shotcrete, fused deposition modeling? Are you talking about concrete slip forming? Binder jet printing for the formwork, so you have traditional concrete, or kind of moldless shaping with a kind of internal matrix, right? These are 6 different digital concrete technologies that we identified. And inspired by the view of the kind of industrialized construction, we try to also have a holistic view and a framework to understand digital fabrication with concrete. And then we're able to also then say, okay, if you're an industry and you have certain needs, can we map the needs that you have along these different categories with the specific capabilities of the technology as it exists today, and maybe how we project it to go forward in the future. So on the question of robotics, I think it's certainly coming, and there's still also a lot of open questions that are going to be need to be responded to.
Then, as I briefly mentioned, we are in the middle of this, but it will not be less of this. We will have even more focus and challenges of tackling climate and housing crisis. 2 mega trends that to some extent, or quite a lot actually, are a paradox. Because we have a global shortage of affordable quality homes. We need to increase the building of new homes to fill the needs. On the other hand, as all know, buildings and the building process have a huge impact on the climate. And we actually need massive reductions to deal with that mega challenge. So how can we deal with this? We need to increase, but we also need to reduce. That is a challenge that requires some serious innovation. So what role can industrialized construction play in this then? Well, industrialized construction rests on continuity, predictability, and systemic solutions. We can design our industrialized construction systems to meet both sustainability and affordability demands, and several others, of course, but we need to have a multiple design focus. We cannot be singularly focused on only one topic, because then we will fail in one or the other aspect. So we need to, and we can, I think, embed sustainable and efficient solutions into our platforms. And in this way, we can create high-performing, scalable housing based on also sustainable solutions. And I think it's possible if we have a strong customer focus, we work with continuous development processes, and we have optimized our system solutions, not least with the use of digital solutions. We need to look into, of course, new and improved materials. We have to go back again to our business models to really see how that can enable and support these massive challenges. We need to design for circularity and reuse of what we have already built. And we need to accelerate R&D in this space. The thing is, since we are doing industrialized construction is about creating systems that we want to use over and over and over again, if we really embed all these different aspects there, we can really make it better and better and better, and not start over in every project, because then it will be too slow. But in this way, and I don't say I have the solution, I just say that with these principles, we have at least slightly better conditions to tackle these massive challenges. Then I think we are better off than continuing as we have always done, so to say. So I think there is a really, really, really interesting opportunity here for industrialized construction as a concept, and also for companies and organizations taking on these challenges.
Yeah, and I want to zoom in on a specific subset of kind of the sustainability conversation, which is around the idea of circular industrialized construction. And for those who don't know, the idea of a circular economy is that instead of going from a linear economy where we take materials and we dispose of them at the end, we want to transition into more circular material loops where we are reusing and remanufacturing elements and components in order to meet some of the demands of the resource scarcity and climate change. And in particular, I think, I don't just think, we've done some research about the opportunities for resource efficiency and circularity in industrialized construction. And we created some categories here in different ways to understand it. Now, these are not guarantees, they're opportunities, right? So, but as Jirka said, we think that there are ways in which industrialized construction and the thinking about supply chain is much stronger compared to building a new project-based supply chain from project to project. So there's 4 areas. The first one is the idea of product design, where we can think about product optimization, system optimization, and also innovative and industrial materials. And this is actually, I just had a conversation a few months ago with a new startup in Switzerland called Rematter, who I think is really interesting because especially they use a floor slab that's constructed from a timber frame. You can't see it now because I blocked it, but also filled with a compacted soil infill, all with dry assemblies to create screwed assemblies to make a floor slab that can be completely demountable and also deconstructed for a circular economy. We also have opportunities in the manufacturing and supply chain, and there we can think about, by investing smartly and strategically in everything from the specific types of waste recovery and the specific types of energy used in the production process. You can create precision, perpetuity, and synergy in the manufacturing. You can really invest in lean production to reduce waste, and you can look at inventory monitoring and tracking to have better control of your systems. We also see opportunity for logistics and assembly, and here I'll just point out, for example, we had Automated Architecture speak last year about their idea of on-site and near-site factories. So this idea of a smart mobile factory that comes close to the construction site and it can also create a more kind of circular and resource-efficient approach. And finally, we have opportunities around performance and life cycle. So that includes energy efficiency, but also the idea of refurbishment and renovation, product flexibility, and also product as a service. And here's an example of a facade that we have at TU Delft, at my university, which has been a product as a service model since 2016, where that facade is rented and then can be recovered by the manufacturer and reused and put back into the cycle. And we're going to hear a lot more about this afternoon. So we have a session that's focused specifically around resource efficiency and circularity for industrialized construction with 3 great speakers. And then I'll point out that we've in my opinion, Europe is far ahead of North America in this sense, and we've seen a lot of attention, interest, need to address the idea of circular off-site construction systems. This is a new project that I'm working on. The website's up, but the actual data is not. We've gotten 30 suppliers so far who can put up their own information about their circularity of CO2, disassembly potential, and at the moment we're looking for more across Europe so that we can create kind of a network and an ecosystem of suppliers that are working in this area. But there is hope. There are some also attempts here in North America that we're seeing, and I think we'll hear about those more this afternoon.
Another challenge, but also massive opportunity, is our developing countries. We have, with a lot of similarities to what I just talked about, we have huge needs but there is also huge potential. And if we look into what the estimations are, we see that the global population is estimated to grow with 2 billion people between 2020 and 2050. And 1 billion of these are estimated to be in sub-Saharan Africa. Urbanization is a global trend, and it's also estimated to grow from 50% to 68% in these years. And a majority of this growth is in Africa and Asia. Many cities are estimated to triple in size. Already really, really big cities are estimated to triple. So again, as I talked about just recently, huge housing needs. But that is also very, very interesting and important opportunities and a huge potential. So again, as you might guess, there are opportunities and possibilities for industrialized construction to play a role here. It is, of course, super challenging, but with this magnitude and with this scale, let's learn from history. We have had some, as I mentioned in Sweden, the Million Homes program, tiny if we compare with these figures, but if we project that, and we have had, similar programs throughout Europe and also here in the US and so on, and what has been going on in China for the last 25 years and so on and so on. We have some very important learnings to do and to use that for this new step of development globally. So let's learn from history. Let's remember not only to focus on the scale and the numbers, we need to do this in a sustainable, as climate-friendly way as possible. I think there is at least 3 important steps to go about it. I think it's very important to start with the customer insights, market knowledge, and really have that as a foundation before we create our platforms, products, concepts. That should be sort of the answer to our insights and knowledge. And then create production systems, manufacturing and production systems, supply chains, the expensive stuff. Try to do it in that order. And not least, since we are now on this scale, we're talking about many, many different countries, different markets, completely different market situations, we of course need to design the industrialized construction systems, the offerings based on local market conditions. An extreme would be to try to bring a Swedish or a US or a UK or whatever country solutions to a developing country with completely different housing market, completely different industry structure. So that's a very, very important aspect to consider, to also really support the local economies, the local markets, and so on. But done right, that could be a very, very interesting opportunities for the markets and to tackle the huge challenge. And we think that industrialized construction can play a role here, especially since it has to be scalable and it has to be sustainable and predictable in that sense. Then I think industrialized construction has some of the ingredients to tackle this.
And that brings to our last point, which is about the networks of industrialized construction. We're now in the age of AI, right? So everything's about networks, everything's about graphs. But I was thinking about the idea of networks being really important in the future. Both on the technical level, we thought a little bit about the idea of an interconnected network of, we used the word cloud manufacturing to explain how you would have different resources and capabilities of machines tied to different production systems. So for us, there's a lot of technical opportunities and supply chain opportunities with networks, following this idea of Industry 4.0. But there's also the idea of networks that work on socioeconomic research. I mentioned earlier my connection, which I'm still involved with, this large center based in Zurich, Switzerland, where we're actually looking at the interplay between the individual and the work system. So, how do we think about work design, human-machine interaction, and skill requirements? How do we connect that with projects and upscaling of adoption and scale-up, interdisciplinary collaboration? And how do we connect that also with the firm and the market when we think about business models, market opportunities, and entrepreneurship, and also investing in these types of technologies? So there's an example of a network effect there. And we've seen some emerging networks of R&D, research and development, between industry and academia. I think most recently we heard last year from Matthew Aitchison about the Building 4.0 CRC, the very large network of industry and academia in Australia. In fact, they've brought 30 people this year to our event. If you feel like you're talking to a lot of Australians, it's not a coincidence. There's a big delegation here. But there are a number of different initiatives and networks, and we're actually going to hear more about that at the end of the day today. So we'll talk about what is the role of networks and consortiums in advancing this idea of industrialized construction. And so with the summary, I give it back to Jerker.
Yes, just summarizing what we talked about. The robots are coming, we think. They are already here, but they will be more. We will have some interesting development there. Tackling climate crisis and the housing crisis is a huge challenge, huge opportunities too. We can use industrialized construction principles to work with that. Circular industrialized construction, sort of same theme. Developing countries, also same theme. Massive challenges, but also really, really interesting opportunities. And it requires R&D development, and that's not possible to do alone, so we need to do that together. So, challenging, but also super exciting times ahead, and I think we have also a very interesting and exciting day in front of us. Some of the things we have mentioned here are actually also topics that will be covered during the day today. So we will dig deeper, and it will be a very interesting and good day, I think. So thanks a lot for us. Do we have time for questions? No, not really.
10 minutes late. Yeah, we're late.
We are already late. So let's focus on coffee, get fueled up, and then we will continue. Yeah. Thanks.